Well, good evening, everybody. We are live here on X, YouTube, and Rumble, of course. So don't forget to follow the show, Gen X News, with Melissa, myself, on one of those platforms if you want to get in on the live streams. What are the links? Well, if you're on YouTube, you can type in Melissa Dawn at Gen X News. That will get you to the YouTube channel. And remember to thumbs up the show or share. All those little things help the show grow. Of course, if you're on Rumble, it's rumble.com/c/Gen X on X. So the channel is called Gen X on X on Rumble. And of course, if you're on old Twitter, because there's so many X's, it's just at Gen X News on X. And of course, don't forget the website, genxonx.com, where you can get all the links, including the links to the audio podcast. It's on all those platforms, so don't forget about that. I've got a fascinating show today. One of my favorite movies, one of my favorite horror movies of all time is The Shining. And I first seen it when I was 10 years old. I was in the video store, as you would be in those days, renting a VHS tape. And, well, as it would happen, I was renting like scary tales from Disney, and I thought, oh, this looks spooky. It's a ghost story, The Shining, at 10, and they let me rent it. And that was my first introduction, and I've watched it multiple times ever since. So we're going to talk about that, but we're not going to talk about it in terms of ghosts. My guest today, Walter Bosley, is on, and he has done some amazing things. I'll get him to talk about when he gets on. But we're going to talk about whether or not MK Ultra was inserted into The Shining as like a telltale about what was going on in the government, what was going on in American, Canadian society, and what the government was really up to. And I don't know, maybe we'll even talk about, is Stanley Kubrick a CIA operative? Like, I don't know. We'll go all those places. But first, I'm going to bring Walter in before we do, because we're going to talk about his book that he's got out called The Esoteric Napoleon. Welcome to the show, Walter.
Hey, Melissa, it's great to be here again.
All right. Before we get into The Shining, I wanted to talk about your book quickly because I had the first one, have to get the second one, The Esoteric Napoleon Part 1. Now you have Part 2. What's it about, and why should people be interested in Napoleon?
Well, mainly because what we've learned about Napoleon all these years is mostly British propaganda, over 2 centuries of British propaganda. In the first book, if you recall, I talk about that a bit. In the second book, this one right here, I get into why Napoleon was interested in the Louisiana Territory. Now, France uh, got the Louisiana Territory back in a treaty with Spain in 1801. So naturally, it belonged to France. But he had ordered a secret expedition, a secret team be assembled, and under the strictest classified, well, the word secrecy again, to go in and explore, but no specific, instructions or details are available in the historical record that I have seen, and I read tons. I did tons of research on this. So I thought that the second book would be really interesting if just focused on the Louisiana Territory mysteries. And what's interesting is France had it back for about a year before he sells it to the United States in the bargain of the century. And we never learn why he wanted to send the secret team. We never learn if the secret team actually went. We don't know anything about what they might have found. And then, of course, you have Thomas Jefferson, who's equally interested in the strange things in our world. And he instructs Meriwether Lewis, because it's the Lewis and Clark expedition. Once the United States attained the Louisiana Territory, Jefferson sent the Lewis and Clark expedition, okay, the Corps of Discovery it was called, in to explore the Louisiana Territory thoroughly, because it was the new territory that doubled the size of the United States. But what I didn't know until I started doing this research a few years ago was that Jefferson sent Lewis with a special cipher code that Clark knew nothing about. And Jefferson told Lewis for private little side trips and observations, report to him using the cipher code. And just like with Napoleon's instructed secret team, we don't know what Lewis wrote secretly to Jefferson. We don't know what Jefferson instructed Lewis to look for. So it's a big mystery that is there. I mean, it's a true mystery. These things are documented facts. I mean, you can go to the National Archives and see the letter from Jefferson to Lewis talking about these instructions, for your private little researches. Write this to me in cipher. And when you read the Lewis and Clark journals, Lewis is always taking off. He's always breaking away from the main expedition. And when you do see what he logs for those little side trips, it's always just here's latitude, here's longitude, we went X miles up this river. You don't get the real details as to what he was looking for, what he was finding. So what I did was I considered what could they have found. And you think of all the archaeological anomalies, right? There's stories of Vikings having been here. There's stories of Templars having been to the Americas. There's even, in recent years, this wild idea that there was remnants of a lost civilization, which people have labeled Tartaria. And the Tartaria folks know that I'm kind of an ally of theirs, because I really think they're onto something, but I think some of the details that they come up with are way off. So this book
Yes.
is my way of throwing a legitimate bone to the Tartaria folks. Okay?
Right.
Because there's all sorts of evidence that there was a lost Vedic civilization way before, we're talking the time of Atlantis and all that, right? And there's evidence that maybe they were here in some capacity. When I say here, in North America.
In North
And
America.
perhaps that's what Jefferson and Lewis found on the Lewis and Clark expedition, but it might be what Napoleon was actually looking for, wanted his team to look for, because a lot of people don't know France was here in force, sent 2/3 of its navy resources here to the Americas to
Right.
deal with their war with England, to deal mainly with an uprising in Santo Domingo, okay? But to use the Americas as a launching point for expeditions to India. So,
Interesting.
I don't want to give...
They thought this was a route to India back then, didn't they?
Well, here's what's interesting
Or
about that.
something like that.
When you look at the perspective that maybe somebody did know something about lost Vedic civilization, explorers and settlers having been here, maybe that doesn't sound so ignorant or crazy that Columbus was looking
Mhm.
for a way to India. Maybe what he was looking for were also remnants of this lost Vedic civilization. Maybe they knew something, that Napoleon learned later and that we just haven't known until recently. So that's what I go into in this book, and I'm real excited that it's out, and I think people who like the first one will love this one. And if you're
Well,
interested in any of this kind of stuff,
Napoleon did so many good things that no one gives him credit
oh
for.
yeah,
And
Napoleon,
when I see all the stuff today about Trump and other figures and villainizing of all these political figures, you've got, I'm not saying that they're perfect or they're all good, but you've got to question
yeah,
these narratives about people. And
oh
I
yeah,
mean, Napoleon, didn't he go? He was in the pyramids as well, and they tried to say he shot off the nose because it was,
he had nothing to do with shooting the nose
yeah,
off of the
I
Sphinx.
know of the Sphinx.
But
It'd be interesting to see what he saw, like,
yeah,
know things about what he experienced inside the pyramids and stuff.
and of course I go into that in the book, and I continue with how that might have had an impact on what he was looking for in North America.
And that would have been the film that Kubrick should have done about him.
Well, isn't that is yeah, see,
Esoteric
isn't that interesting?
Napoleon.
Yeah,
And we're gonna get into Kubrick.
isn't that interesting that he was fully on board to do a Napoleon film and then ups and decides, "No, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
do it," and does Barry Lyndon instead.
And
That's
Barry Lyndon is a visually beautiful,
yes.
beautiful film, but it's boring.
Oh god, yeah, yeah.
It's hard to watch.
It's exactly what the Napoleon film was supposed to look like. So if
Mhm.
Kubrick had done his Napoleon film, that's what it would have looked like. And there's nothing more
Yeah.
disappointing than knowing that or hearing that Ridley Scott was able to consult the Kubrick Napoleon script and he ended up making that movie that he made last
With
year.
Joaquin Phoenix, yeah, I heard
Yeah,
mixed reviews.
the movie, if it just retitle it Napoleon and Josephine and repackage it and say this movie is about their relationship, and it's a good movie. But other
Yeah,
than that, it's a huge disappointment.
interesting. Because he really gotta go for a different angle with, than we've already seen, something like you have with esoteric stuff. Now,
Yeah,
we're gonna get into the Kubrickian side of stuff.
there we
The
go.
Kubrickian wild side. It would have been cool to watch him do a film of Napoleon in the pyramids and something a little more Space Odyssey 2001, but we never got that.
Mm.
But we did get The Shining, and I heard that he made The Shining because he had turned down The Exorcist, and Warner Brothers told him, "You got to do this."
Yeah, it was he owed them a horror film, and so and I think they're the ones who put The Shining, the galley before it was actually released publicly, into his hands. And of course, Stephen King, whose works up to about the mid 1980s, I admire a lot. I enjoy a lot,
Yes.
and those are the works that are gonna 100 years from now,
Plus,
if any literary
I,
teacher,
I, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
if any literature professor ever mentions Stephen King, it's going to be for the stuff he wrote in the 70s. And
Yeah, ironically, cocaine fueled.
yeah, yeah, that's true. But he was notoriously a persnickety little brat over Kubrick's version of his book because he didn't comprehend the brilliance
Mhm.
that Kubrick was. Kubrick's thing is take a book, take a story, but what the movie's actually about is the subtext of that
Mhm.
story, right?
Right.
Coppola ends up using doing the same thing at about the same time with Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is all about the subtext, all about
Mhm.
the subtext. What that movie's really about is in the subtext, not the overt, which is still amazing. The Vietnam story, but
Mhm.
it's all subtext. And what's interesting is how that movie comes out a year before The Shining, and they're kind of doing a very similar thing, right down to get this. Here's a connection between Apocalypse Now and The Shining. Okay, one particular actual scene, okay, from each movie is virtually identical. When Jack Torrance is in the initial, it's not really his interview. He's got the job. It's his kind of welcome to the job meeting
Right.
with Ullman
W
and the other guy. Okay,
that
there's the other
strange
guy.
little man, yes.
Yeah, they're sitting in the office, and the other guy, I think he says just a few words in the whole scene, but most of the time when you look at the shots, while Jack is interacting with Ullman, the boss, the other guy's just shown looking at him silently, just looking at him silently, right? And
It's
Jack is
kinda odd.
receiving what his duties are going to be. He's being told what his mission is. He's told about the ups and downs. He's told about the crazy guy who kills his daughters and,
Just
all this
almost
stuff.
implanting ideas in his head.
Yeah. So then you'd go to Apocalypse Now, okay, which came out the year before, and the
Mhm,
scene where Captain Willard, Martin Sheen, is
mhm,
brought to the, I think it's a general, G.D. Spradlin is the actor, and Harrison Ford's the intelligence officer, and he's brought to these bosses to be told what his mission is, what his job's going to be, just like Jack Torrance in
uh,
front of Ullman. And there's that third guy, that weird little guy in the civilian clothes who's just sitting there, doesn't say any words at all. Every time you see him, he's just looking at Martin Sheen and silently assessing him. This is virtually identical to the scene in The Shining. Now, here's the funny thing. Just like the guy in The Shining only says a few words, this little guy in Apocalypse Now only says a few words. And when they get to what they really want him to do to Apocalypse is Now crazy guy, Colonel Kurtz, right? We heard about the
mhm.
crazy guy who killed his wife and kids in this briefing in The
There's always
Shining.
a crazy guy, yeah.
In this briefing, there's Colonel Kurtz, the crazy guy. And remember, Harrison Ford is all nervous and sweaty, and he tells him, we want you to terminate the colonel's command. And they're looking at him. And then the little guy, the civilian, says the only words he says in the scenes, and that's with extreme prejudice. He's the one that gives him the real instruction.
He
That's
had the
the
real
instruction.
trigger.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Interesting.
it's just kind of interesting. Also later in the film, and we're going to get into it, I know, in The Shining, when Jack goes to the bar and Lloyd is giving him the drinks, right? Ryder Lee points out in the documentary Clockwork Shining that is where Jack was being given the drug, the MK Ultra drugs.
Right.
Okay, now
They slipped it in his drink kinda
they
thing. That's
slipped it
what
in his
MK
drink.
Ultra did.
In Apocalypse Now, in this scene I just described, where just like in The Shining, he's getting his instructions from the boss, and there's the weird little guy. What they're doing in that scene, what are they doing? They're feeding him. They're having lunch. They're feeding him. They're giving him something to drink. So that's where they're giving him the drug. So it's just, to me, it's mind blowing. Did Coppola and Kubrick know each other? Did they compare notes? Were they, essentially talking about the same thing? I don't know.
Yeah. Did you see The Shining in theater or video originally? Like, did you were you a big, Kubrick fan? Did you like to go see all the movies
Oh,
in theater?
at that time, um, I was still in high school when that came out, and
Okay.
I saw it in the theater. In fact, I remember the exact theater I saw it in here in San Bernardino. Um, but at that time, I was in high school, and I was what they call a media tech. I was one of the nerds in the library who would take the video players to the rooms and, bring the movies that
Right.
they would watch. So I got to watch a lot of movies that we had over and over. And I think at that time I had watched 2001: A Space Odyssey probably about 11
Right.
times. And I had seen bits and pieces of A Clockwork Orange, which at the time didn't do much for me. So I was aware of Kubrick, of course,
Mhm.
but that was the first one of his films that I had seen on the big screen. So I did see that, I think, twice at the theater.
I was 3, so I didn't see it. I would have never been shown it, but I remember my uncles, my mother's brother, they had, like, a projector, and I remember them watching Space Odyssey 2001, though I didn't know what it was at the time. I was way too little, but I just remember that I thought, "That's weird looking. What's going on here?" And they had all the soundtrack stuff, like, on records,
Yeah.
big records. So that's dating myself. I just had a film projector and a record. I haven't said an 8-track yet.
Yeah, I think I saw The Shining when, Malia was probably about a couple of months old.
Yeah.
I was,
Oops.
I had turned 17 by 1980, so I was a high school senior when I saw it. The Shining.
So you appear in A Clockwork Shining,
Uh-huh.
and what was your expertise like when Jade Widener and Ryder Lee? It's a great documentary, guys. You have to go see it. I'm going to show uh,
Yeah.
at the end of the podcast. I'll show the trailer for it. But what were you appearing for? Like today, what was your expertise on this kind of MK Ultra stuff that the documentary is saying exists in The Shining?
Well, having been in the military for a certain period of years, I'm an Air Force officer, reserve inactive is my present status. My whole time on active duty, I was a special agent of the Air Force OSI. Now, the Air Force, in the early 50s, early mid 50s, the CIA brought in the military branches: Army, Navy, Air Force. The Air Force was young then. Remember, they stood up in 48. This was the early 50s. And they taught, they were teaching MK Ultra to the military branches. The one branch that all the records and the history indicate that was really excited, really that turned on the most about MK Ultra, was the Air Force. So much so that the
Mhm.
Air Force started their own independent program. And to this day, we don't know how far they took it, because they never had to testify to Congress in the mid 70s like the CIA did. So here's the thing: the MK Ultra program of the Air Force would have been in the aerospace medicine division of the U.S. Air Force, because that's where your psychiatrists and your psychologists are. Okay. Now, my dad's specialty in the Air Force um, fell under the aerospace medical division. So the other reason why I was in the documentary, not just from the military OSI perspective, and by the way, OSI is an agency that, if any agency in the Air Force used MK Ultra stuff, OSI would be one
They
of
were
them.
it.
You
Yeah.
know, but because we have OSI psychiatrists and stuff, but because of what I wrote about in this book, Shimmering Light, about my dad, that's him right there. That was the other reason I was brought in to talk about this,
Mhm.
because in this book that I released in 2017, I think, or late 2016, I present the evidence that my dad was very likely exposed to MK Ultra methods, and
Mhm.
it was detrimental to him to the rest of his life.
Mhm.
Based on things I was told when I was on active duty, I was told that they suppressed his memories with hypnosis, was how it was described to me. They never used the MK by a superior officer who was deep in an intelligence world. Um, they never used the acronym MK Ultra, because who knows what they called it by the late 90s.
Mhm.
Um, but because of that, that research I did, that investigation I did on my dad, they had me come in and talk about the MK Ultra perspective. But they never told me. They said I was the first person they interviewed in all the interviews they did, and they said, we're not going to tell you. Ryder and Jay said, we're not going to tell you what what we talk about in the film, what our theory
Mhm.
is. We want you to see the film when it's done, so that you can get the full impact and tell us what you think. So I had no idea that I was going to see this absolutely brilliant, spot on analysis of what Kubrick was really doing with The Shining.
And what's really interesting is it ties into A Clockwork Orange as well, because it's
Mhm.
mentioned in there of all. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of obvious they're doing mind control in A Clockwork Orange.
Yes.
It's blatant, and then that it's like he carries that theme on, but in a more subtle manner in a subtext in The Shining.
Hmm.
And so it's I don't know, it seems to be possibly a theme in all of his movies.
There's something definitely with Kubrick, the human mind, what's going on with development of the human psyche, and the human mind, and how it can be toyed with and manipulated. You could probably find that thread, you're right, in all of his films. I mean, people are pointing it out in Full Metal Jacket. You could even go back
Eyes
to
Wide Shut.
well, Eyes Wide Shut, definitely. But now, I want to go back and watch, his early films again, because, unless there's a
Path
distinct
to
line,
Glory.
unless 2001 or Lolita, I mean, what's the subtext there? Unless there's a definitive line that he started doing this with 2001, okay, but it makes me wonder how many films he actually was giving us a rich subtext that was overlooked.
Yeah, and I never considered ever before I started looking at these documentaries and other things that he was possibly funded by the CIA. And
Mm,
I thought, well, a lot of his, and I started to really think about it because he took a long time on his movies. He was afforded a really big luxury that no director ever gets.
right,
And he had a lot of money and a lot of production value. And some of those films did not make up that money to pay for it.
right,
So it appeared to me that the use of Kubrick was not just for financial gain. And I really
right.
thought about that. And I thought, wow, yeah, he did have a lot of time. That's rare.
Yeah, in fact, the farther he went along, the more time it seemed he was allowed to take. Because in early Hollywood, Erich von Stroheim famously was taking forever to get a particular film done and shot apparently just miles of footage, and the studio clamped down on him. And I think Kubrick was the first to come anywhere close to that after von
Mm.
Stroheim, and that was 4 decades later. Um, Here's the interesting thing: if he started out with funding and with some type of guidance or approval of the intelligence community, specifically the CIA, I think I think he might have The Shining might have been his departure from that approval,
Right.
because look at his films. Look at now what we see The Shining was actually about. That's not a positive CIA's doing a great thing with this MK Ultra type of story. It's quite
Mhm.
the opposite. And then Full Metal Jacket, is another one of those that, it has this kind of rah feel to it, but that's not a rah pro-war film. And then
It's
of course we
not.
get to Eyes Wide Shut, where he just blatantly goes against the elites, and some say pays for it. He dies before it's released.
And then they edit like 20, 25 minutes out of it.
They bring Spielberg in
Mhm.
to look at that, and then also they bring Spielberg in to take over AI. And
Yeah, and he said that he gave it to Spielberg because it was a Spielberg movie. Apparently that it wasn't his, and I'm like, "Okay,
yeah,
maybe."
well, who knows?
Maybe. So when the movie starts, in the documentary, they kind of outline, like, there seems to be, like, a starting period, like you said, where he's being engaged by these people. There's,
Mhm.
a mid period where they're there by themselves and it's getting started, and then it builds up into this craziness.
Yeah.
Is that the process you think? Like, do you that is that how MK Ultra's done?
Well,
Like,
think about it.
are they describing
They
it?
they bring you into it, and it's all hail good fellow, it's all good. This is hey, welcome to the fold, that kind of thing. And then you know, you're isolated, and they begin to push levers and buttons in your psyche until they push you over the top, and then they watch and they observe and see what happens. So yeah, I would say it appears to be a perfect model of what they would put someone through. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I,
and
I I think looking back on it, it's definitely the structure of that, the way he told the story. It would be that.
it's interesting that the Ullman figure, the guy who's obviously in charge of the hotel,
Hmm.
they mention that he looks like JFK.
There, yeah. Well, there's this kind of outline, posture, image, right? That I don't want to say meme, but a visual archetypal
Mhm.
kind of illusion. It's a visual illusion to JFK. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because once they said that, I was like, "Oh, yeah, so he could be alluding." I don't know. It's not like Ullman dies or anything. I don't think he's alluding to assassination. That would be really bold. But he's I don't know. What do they say? I can't remember what they say in the documentary about it, that
Well,
he's
there's
alluding to something about that archetype.
Yeah, it's that played a bigger deal in the theory in room 237, that it was all about Kubrick faking the Apollo landings, which is something I don't
Okay.
believe in at all.
Okay. Okay.
Um, that one's kind of off the mark. But what is interesting is that it is there, and it also plays into the latent homosexuality thread that runs through the story. When Jack
Right.
is in the lobby, he's looking at a Playgirl magazine, um, which for those who haven't been around that many decades, that there's Playboy, there's
That's for
Playgirl. Playgirl features
gay
naked
men.
men, and
Yeah.
then there's this alleged symbolism that's pointed out of oral sex going on in the way when Ullman stands up in a dominant position over Jack, and
Hmm.
there's this piece of the
It's like a paper
desk
holder
item,
thing.
yeah,
Nice. Yeah.
and it's supposed to be a phallic symbol and all of that. So,
Yeah.
and then later on, there's the guy in the dog suit who's
I'll sh-
clearly
I'll show you guys that picture right here.
yeah, right there. Now,
This guy right here.
before this shot, the guy in the tuxedo is laying on his back, and the guy in the dog suit has his face in his lap. So it's clear what's going on there. And
And then Wendy walks in upon that. This is when everything's going, like, Jack's trying to kill them and everything's
yeah,
going crazy. And Wendy starts actually seeing this crazy stuff too.
yeah,
And so that's what's interesting, because throughout the whole movie, it's
hmm
just Jack and his son Danny that are having these strange experiences, and Wendy's running the show and remaining calm. It's not until the end that she starts like seeing what's really there, or what they can see anyways.
yeah, yeah. And
Shining.
I had always, I'll admit, all these times I'd watched it, all these years, I was taking it at face value that these were ghosts. And in A Clockwork Shining, in Ryder and Jay's film, they point out there's not a single ghost in the film. These are all the MK Ultra role players that are there to push Jack
Yep.
through this experiment. And so when you think about it in those terms, they're all role players. Lloyd, the bartender, the people in the costumes, from the past in the gold room,
Mhm.
the lady. Now, the thing about the lady in the shower, I guess, she could be fake too, because with the hallucinogenics that they put in his drinks, he could have been imagining her as a corpse. See, she
Yeah.
could have just been how she looked as her younger self, the naked lady that stands up in the shower. And because of the drugs and the suggestions and stuff that they were putting
Right.
in his head, that could have been a trip he was on. In fact, Ryder points that out, that the colors inside room 237 are so wild and different that it is a trip,
Psychedelic,
an
yeah.
LSD trip that Jack is on. So,
Right. So, and I did a show on the woman who was talking. She went on Patrick David Bett, and she was talking about, she was basically a mind controlled child for sex slave, and she talked about uh, Pierre Elliott Trudeau and a whole bunch of people, and she talked about trauma as a way of mind control, and that theme is so strongly in there with Danny, with the children, the violence. It's
mhm.
it's like blatantly like child abuse and trauma is it's not even subtle to me. When I was a little kid and I first watched that movie, there's a scene where Danny goes in to get his fire truck, and Jack Nicholson's playing Jack Torrance, and he comes and tells him to sit on his lap. I was a kid, 10, 11, and I was so uncomfortable with that scene. I was like, don't sit on his lap. I didn't know why, but it was uncomfortable. And that subtext is that there's child abuse happening, not just physical abuse, but psychological, sexual. And when I was watching that thing, I connected these, because she's talking about MK Ultra too, that when they're really young, if they get them really young, they do it through trauma and abuse and sexual abuse so that they're easier to mind control. And I think they do it to the population en masse all the time.
Yeah, the nature of MK Ultra is such that this can be done to us through our televisions. This can be done through film. This could easily be done through music. It's interesting. I haven't talked about this that much, oddly, because I talk a lot about my stuff. But back in the late 70s, around 1978, 79, late 78, my family, before my parents got divorced, normal middle class suburban American family, and we would watch TV, watch our TV shows every night, right? It's what everybody did. And around that time, I kind of detached from that, and I would lay down. We had our stereo behind one of the couches. There was an area between the two. And I would lay down on the floor with the headphones and listen to music instead. I would listen to classical music. Okay. And then I would listen to Dr. Demento, and then the late night David Letterman's first show was on the radio before he was ever on TV. That's how far back this went, called Welcome to Hollywood. And but I would listen to classical music, and I've always found it interesting that it was later in 79 that I had my weird awakening experience. And then years later, a couple of decades, or in the late 80s, it first started. I was working in an office where I was the only guy working with like 25 women. And they, yeah, on the one hand, it was great because I'm the young guy working in an office of women. Imagine how popular I was. But they would listen to the love song radio stations all friggin' day. And it was just by the time I got to lunchtime, I was just going insane with this heart-wrenching love song crap. And so that was my first taste of, wait a minute, just like with the classical music breaking me from TV, this music crap really affects your mood. So over the years, I would be like, wait a minute, I'm going to be more selective about what goes in, what the input is, because I began to develop this idea, you know what? Don't let the mood control you. You control the mood. And that was my first experiences over the years of what audio input, right, and of course visual input could do to us. So when I started learning about the ideas that they use, like for instance, when they changed the audio hertz level, that
I
started
was going to mention that. They
yeah.
changed it.
And they claim that, like, even the Beatles. Now, this I don't know to what degree I believe. I definitely believe in the influence. You got to. I mean, Dave McGowan's Weird Scenes in the Canyon. You got to read that book, folks, because there is some truth there. I mean, Zappa, David Crosby, Stephen Stills, Mamas and the John Phillips, Jim Morrison. All these
Michelle
people had
Phillips, yeah.
parents that were military or military intelligence. So there was definitely an influence. The idea that they made up the Beatles music, no. But I realized that I'm in that generation that, and you guys are right after me, that really, Vietnam was the war, going on that I could first remember, and all that hippie era and all the, all that stuff, late 60s and through the 70s. And it was supposed to be the heart of this. And my sisters and I were MGM kids, which was part of the GATE program, which we know now was totally direct, came out of this whole playing with MK Ultra type stuff. MGM, it was mentally gifted minds, they called it. I remember being pulled out of class in first grade and second grade, go see Mr. Cottrell. And Mr. Cottrell was this nice guy in a dark suit who was sitting in a chair, little table outside, and would just have me sit down, little first grade Walter, second grade Walter, and just read words off of a page. Okay, thank you, Walter. And then send me back in. No explanation, but I ended up in a first grade class that learned reading through this ITA stuff. And then I was moved, my sisters weren't, but I was moved from a regular second grade class into a second, third grade mix, because somehow I had rated, mentally gifted. Now people would say that guy, but it was, all this stuff going on. I look back and I'm thinking they have been doing this to us through music, movies, literature, school, everything. I mean, look how America changed. Look how America changed when baseball went from being the predominant American sport that everybody cared about to football. Okay. We've become, I hate to say it, football fans, but we've become more brutish and dumber and dumbed down the more football has risen to ascendancy.
That's interesting, because then basketball is really popular too.
And it's not much more intellectually stimulating than football.
Well, And it's interesting that you mentioned Nam, because they say that the CIA invented basically acid and LSD, and they were using it on the soldiers in Nam. Nazi Germany was using drugs on their soldiers. It
Mhm.
seems like they test a lot of this stuff out on their soldiers, and then they're pushing it out into the main population, and it's infiltrated. I mean, it's there in The Shining with drug use, and it's also in A Clockwork Orange because they drink that Moloko drink.
Yeah.
They're all getting high
Oh,
and going
Moloko,
crazy
yeah,
and
Moloko,
doing the
which
old
is
ultra violence.
which is the Russian word for milk, by the way,
Exactly.
which,
And
interesting.
so it's all about like creating, I don't know, it looks like it's about to create, like you said, like these puppets that can be triggered towards violence.
Triggered towards violence and, submissiveness, slaves.
Yeah.
They want us to be, serfs, slaves, and the way to do that is, if they can get in here, they can control these, you know, um, and our, what we say. If they can control
Hmm.
what we think, they control what we say and what we do with our hands.
And
And
they also we then control what other people say. We shame people if they tell the
yes.
truth.
Religion, the control device we call that is known to humankind as religion, it is a control system. That, for a long time that worked. And then as the secular culture started, rising, they had to go to other things, right? So
Hmm.
they went to, in what we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years is, the most recent example is the whole cancel culture thing. That was that's as fanatical as any religion, as any theology out there.
Hmm.
And we see this on both sides of the political spectrum. To be honest, we see both extremes. We see that it's team aggression, and they shame the members of their fold. Okay, or if the
For
shame doesn't
thinking.
work, they banish them.
Thinking and questioning the narrative. Now, there's a question in our thing, and I'm gonna try to expand this because just one second. There was a question. Let's go back to the chat. Sorry, everybody. And they asked, did Kubrick ever make any remark about MK Ultra? And I don't know if he did. I know he studied. He says he studied in the notes in the museum. He talks about studying Freud a lot.
Hmm.
That's all I know. But in this one scene, they mention in the documentary, I'm going to put up an image of it. They go into Gold Ballroom,
Hmm.
and there is swastikas. If you look over in the pink walls, you can see sort of like a real subtle swastika background. What's Kubrick? Do you think that's there? Is it just pareidolia, or is Kubrick trying to say something about the Nazis and MK Ultra and mind control? Like, what do you think's going on here?
Yeah, I think he's showing that you're looking at the action in the forefront, right? By the way, as a writer points out in the film, that they're walking with the same foot positions and posture and lineup as the Beatles on the Abbey Road album cover.
Exactly.
And here's the interesting thing. So you're looking at the foreground is what you're supposed to be looking at. What's behind all this MK Ultra shenanigans going on? Well, what's behind it was MK Ultra, which originated, it came from Nazi mind control. So what they're saying is beyond that, what's behind all this that you're looking at is the Nazi science. So if you break down what you're looking at, here's the main characters. That's the story at hand. All the seats in the middle between them and that back wall, that's going to be filled with the role players. That's the CIA. And what's behind what the CIA is doing is back there on the wall, which are the swastikas. So it's a way to use kind of a cinematic hieroglyphs to embed that
Hmm.
idea in the
But
human psyche, the viewer.
I mean, obviously, it takes a lot of analysis to bring that forward to consciousness. Right? And most of us will get the ghost story, we'll get a whole bunch of different levels, but it takes a lot of study. But there is something that doesn't feel right about the movie. Even when you just see it
Yeah.
on a glance, there's something that feels wrong, and you have to keep parsing through it to bring what we just showed you, what that documentary shows you, forward. Not everybody's seen that for decades.
Well, but the beauty though, the beauty in what Ryder and Jay have accomplished with this is it once the key is in the door and turned, once they've turned on that light to the idea that, hey, look what this is about. If you know your MK Ultra basic history, which most people do, it actually isn't difficult. It actually all falls together. This was to me, this was an epiphany watching this documentary, which I'm in because they didn't tell me what they were going to reveal, and it just no other theory about The Shining, none, not one, makes more and not even as much sense of the entire film as Ryder's theory in Clockwork Shining. This theory that it's all an MK Ultra experiment operation. Every scene they point to, everything in the film just
Yeah.
beautifully fits in with this being an MK Ultra thing. And that's the thing is once that key is turned on that, it all falls into place. It becomes obvious in an instant. It becomes clear. And when you watch Room 237, there's some good ideas in there. There's some interesting things they point out, but not a single one of those theories really gives you that light going on. My God, I see it. This
Yeah.
is the one. This is the one that explains Kubrick's Shining.
Now they also talk about, and I'm going to flash up this image as well. They talk about people might call it a continuity error. And then we know Kubrick was way too
Precise.
specific and precise and obsessive, you could say, to have that many continuity errors. And I'm going to pop this picture up. It's Danny. He's playing on the carpet.
Uh-huh.
And apparently in some scenes he's in the middle, but then he pops to another place in another scene, like in over, and it switches, but you don't catch it because of the pattern it's all so similar. I think people miss that there's stuff, but there's a whole bunch of these continuity errors that are probably not continuity errors. Do you want to expand or talk about that in terms of MK Ultra? What, like the typewriter changing colors, a chair being there in one scene and then not being there in the next scene? It's over and over and over again.
It might be, it could be multiple things. One thing, it could be a cinematic mind trick in that everybody's familiar, I think, now with the Insidious films, with the work of Lee Wanell and those guys. And in the Insidious films, anytime you see the color red, you know that a certain thing is going to happen, or this is they use the color red, like a red door or some type of red object, and that's where you're supposed to really pay attention. That's when something's significant. Well, it could be Kubrick doing that kind of thing. When you see things disappearing, that's the cue that a particular weird thing is happening here. So it could be that. It could be that he was making some type of visual creative statement on what was being done to the characters. Okay, like the direction of the carpet thing. Things are being flipped around, in the characters' minds. That's one that I would like to see further analysis done on, because there are multiple possibilities, but what he was doing exactly, unless it's in his notes or he told someone, it would take analysis, further analysis.
Yeah, it's interesting because originally I thought, oh, that's how he's showing the phenomena. That's how he's showing the ghost, because that's sometimes how it happens. Like you're looking and you see something and you look away and it's gone, and it's moved or it's gone or it's somewhere else. You don't actually see it moving. And I'm like, well, maybe he's trying to do that in a subtle form. But I'm like, wouldn't he want to be more forward about the phenomena?
Or like when in the shots, in the moments where the chair is gone, is what Jack doing and saying, is that just going on in his mind, or is that what's really happening? And then when the chair is back, is it, or is he
Right.
trying to flip flop between, in the dimension of Jack's mind, or we're out of Jack's, mind in the
Right.
actual real
Because
world?
the layout, there's a guy named Rob Ager. And he
Yeah,
talks about how the layout makes 0 sense. It's not a layout, and it would seem to me that the layout doesn't it's not solid in reality. It's shifting, it's changing.
yeah.
It's like the doors here to this. Even the whole layout of the hotel is physically impossible.
Yeah, yeah, and is that supposed to be symbolic for the human mind? The human mind when it's breaking down, the human mind when it's being MK ultra'd.
Yeah.
I say we have to look at it from a perspective like that. Now that we see that this film, the subtext is a story about MK Ultra.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it seems to speed up. It seems to get more intense as you go along. There's also I want to talk about some characters and what they might represent.
Uh-huh.
You have we talked about the dog suit stuff. That's pretty obvious, but you have Mr. Grady here
Yeah.
and Jack Nicholson in the bathroom scene. That was a really disturbing scene. It is weird. It felt weird when I first seen it. I didn't understand really what's going on, but this reeks of MK Ultra and instruction, and I
Sure.
don't know if you want to like I never saw it until I saw that documentary. I'm like, "Oh my god.
Yeah,
He's
yeah, it's an instruction for Jack to. This is similar to the Apocalypse Now thing, where with extreme prejudice. This is Grady telling Jack that he must uh, what's the word, correct them. He must correct his
Mhm.
wife and child, and essentially with extreme prejudice. So he's the guy giving the kill order. Grady is the guy who is giving the kill order. By the way, that shot of Jack Nicholson there, it was in that scene that I realized that if they ever remake this, and particularly in a comic way, Jason Sudeikis needs to play Jack Nicholson's character, because I cannot unsee Jason Sudeikis now in Nicholson's face back then. But that's a little side note for
Interesting.
fun. Yeah, Grady is the guy who gives the kill order. Now, could we analyze that further? Because remember, there's the name thing. At one point in the movie, Grady's referred to as Charles Grady, but Nicholson, I believe, in that scene, he goes, "I know you. You're Delbert Grady." We go from Delbert to Charles. Is Charles a reference to Charles Manson? Then who would Delbert be? Or is there? Of course, there's Charles Whitman, who I believe that was Whitman's first name, the
Yeah.
Texas Tower shooter.
Yeah.
Um, what's going on with the names? Why the now? If you're dealing with CIA, you're talking about undercover names, different names. Is it a reference to that? I mean, in my career, I had 9 undercover names in a 20-year career, you know,
Oh, interesting.
and
So different
only
names.
2 didn't get used. I mean, over the years, I used 7 of those, and sometimes for a month at a time.
How
And
do you stay stable if you have to have a whole bunch of different identities? I
it's
have an issue with that. Like people call themselves names and stuff and different identities, even online. I'm like, no, I'm just
well,
Melissa.
when it's only a month at a time, which that's what it was for me, a month at a time, a different country each time. Um, it's weirdly, it's kind of it's liberating, because I knew that when I would leave, all my Walter Bosley business would be handled while I was away, and I could detach from Walter Bosley, and
Take a
I was
break.
this other guy for a month, and you know, with a lot of the leeway and the freedom, I mean, I would go sometimes a few days without seeing another team member and just free to do my own thing. And, I could have done anything while I was out there, and no one would know. No one would have been the wiser.
Hmm.
What's interesting is you do get, I don't want to call it a swagger, but you get this
An ego
focus.
trip?
You're on a
No.
mission. It's not an ego with a big E, but you're on a mission,
Hmm.
and you have wider parameters than you do as a regular citizen on that mission. Okay, you can use lethal force to protect yourself or others, or to make sure the mission goes. Um, and that kind of there. I mean, that's a whole conversation in itself. But is this an allusion to? Is Grady an allusion to? Is he the operative? These different names. Uh, there's a thing there with the names, an aspect of how the names are that I am not at liberty to say, because it would blow covers and stuff, but not the specific name, Grady and Charles or Delbert. But uh, it's really interesting. I don't know. I think the whole Grady thing bears a closer look.
That is fascinating. Now I'm going to pop up this picture because this is iconic too. There's so many iconic images that stick in people's mind that you can't get rid of. Maybe that's the point, but you've got the Grady twins, the
Yes.
focus of horrendous violence on children.
Yes.
Because when Danny comes around this corner and he sees these twins, and he sees what happened to them, and then he sees them in the hallway standing there, and it flashes between a bloody scene and this scene, almost showing him kind of his fate, like he's psychically seeing. That's the other
Mhm.
thing. There's a lot of psychic stuff going on here from trauma.
Mhm.
But I wonder, what do the twins, what do these little girls represent if in MK Ultra? I wonder.
Um, well, the splitting of the psyche. It's good that we were talking about undercover identities, because, like I said, what did I just say a moment ago? You become that other. I'm that other guy for 30 days. So there's things with my cover identity that guy would do in his spare time that maybe I don't do as Walter Bosley. So there really is. They set you up for a potential to have a split personality. So
Right.
are there really two daughters, or was there just one? Is this what they're
Right.
trying to do to Danny, is split him? Because that's one of the things MK Ultra was trying to do in creating an assassin. They when you picked up the
Right.
phone, they would give you the trigger word, and you would
Right.
go into this other identity. You go take care of your mission, and at some point they contact you and give you the turn off word, and then you become
And
that
then you don't
person,
even know. You
and
don't
you're
even
not supposed
remember.
to remember what it is you did as that other
Well,
person. So you
that's fascinating because Kubrick plays the song "It's All Forgotten Now,"
yeah.
the Al Bowley song. So that's really interesting that you say that, because you kind of forget. There's one person where it all comes out and they do their mission, and then there's another person where they're totally unconscious. They forget everything. So, and Jack, they tell him he's been here before, but it's like he forgets. So that's
Well,
really interesting.
what came to my mind when we're talking about the little girls here and the splitting, um, I've had some pretty intense experiences, as you know, with Hecate, and that whole thing in my head about Hecate. And in a dream I had about her, a very significant dream, I saw these two older stately women that were twins. And then it was
Mhm,
after, when I, in my waking state, I heard a song in a grocery store, and the song triggered me. You could say it made me giddy, and I understood the dream. And that song was, now think about all the levels of this. The song was the Pretenders. Okay, the song "Don't Get Me Wrong," which is all about an Avengers TV series episode kind of thing. Mr. Steed's in it, and she's a secret
mhm.
agent. And there was all this other stuff. I've talked about it elsewhere, but here's the thing: when she sings the line, um, uh, "Don't something, if I split like light refracted," and I realized I didn't see twin ladies. I saw one woman split like light refracted. I saw her
Mhm.
too. And so that's what they're trying to do to the human psyche. It's one girl, and they're trying to split her into the two. So they might have been, think of the GATE program with children that I referred to, that a whole bunch of us, your generation and mine, were
Mhm.
pulled into that. Okay. Um,
What was that again? What was that at
It
the
was
gate?
for special kids who displayed uh, uh, a higher level of intellect and intelligence, at a very early age. But what's interesting is, me and my sisters, our dad, I mean, hello, you
Right.
know, and my mentor told me in the mid 80s, he said, mid late 80s, he said, um, you've been watched since childhood. He flat out told me that, and he's the guy that brought me into my career. And he died a few years ago, but he retired with 44 years in the Intel community. His mentor was James Jesus Angleton, who I just learned that in 1999, and I never said that publicly till after my mentor died. But Angleton, we all know who he was, and I'm only removed from Angleton by 1 degree, and that's my mentor. And
Interesting.
so it's this GATE program was probably CIA driven and overseen to look at either the kids of people who had been personnel exposed to this, or had been identified one way or another as having an intelligence level and IQ that maybe would be useful for certain things. So I was in the California version of that, which was MGM, Mentally Gifted Minds, and it started in as far
I
as I was
got
aware, it
tested.
started in first grade.
I was tested a lot in school, but
Yeah.
it was weird. Very vaguely remember it. So I just want to address a person in the audience. Got a few comments here. Their comments are disappearing on X. I get lots of views on X, but everything disappears on X. It's hard for me. I can't, if I comment, it won't get on X. So I apologize that your comments are disappearing. They mentioned that it worked on the Unabomber. So I guess after destroying thousands of innocent lives, they had success in their opinion. There you go. Yeah, the Unabomber. He, MK Ultra and all these people. Thank you for bringing up the Unabomber, because he was definitely MK Ultra when he was very young, and he was, again, a genius and probably sought out.
Yeah. They look, it would, even students of this stuff, you would still be astonished to the degree, I think, that they have mapped the human mind, the human psyche, and how subtle the impressions and the influences can be. I mean, now they could beam an audio signal that's inaudible, that your dog might not even hear, but you pick it up in your
Right.
psyche, and for some reason you get in the mood to do something or to go somewhere, and that could be directed from someone. And people, it can, if people, there's a lot of people, if they think about that kind of freaks them out. Again, going back to my mentor, he told me, I was in my 20s, it was right as before I started my career for Uncle Sam. He said, look, no one's ever really alone. You can be watched at any time. Don't lose sleep over it. Just go about your business, unless you're doing something truly criminal.
Flip him the bird. Right.
Unless you're doing something truly criminal, he said, don't worry about it, because everybody's human. They all do those embarrassing things. They don't care about that. They're someone in my position, he goes, their number one thing is, can they trust you? And yeah, there's some cynical stuff there. You'll get, it's like, they don't care that your wife or husband can't trust you. Uncle Sam wants to know that he can trust you. And
Oh,
if you're a
and
person with
what
ethics,
is Uncle Sam? I think that image of Uncle Sam is one thing, but what's beneath that is probably pretty fucking scary. And there's a couple other things that are going on in this documentary. You guys have to go watch it. It's called A Clockwork Shining. Walter is in it as a guest speaker. There's a whole bunch of other people. You can get it on Amazon, and I believe you can get it on Jay Weidner's website. So those are two places you can get it. But they mention in that documentary Catcher in the Rye book, and it's seen in The Shining. It's also mentioned. I'm going to tell you this. When I was a teenager, I loved Winona Ryder. She was one of my favorite actresses, and I was huge into magazines. I was totally absorbed into the crap of culture because I was a teenager. And I would read interviews with her all the time, and she likes to read, but they kept mentioning they said, "What are you reading, Winona? What are you reading?" And every interview for a while, she kept saying The Catcher in the Rye. And I thought, oh, cool, maybe I should read that. I never checked it out. But now that I hear this stuff about The Catcher in the Rye, I'm like, I bet you she wasn't reading The Catcher in the Rye. I bet you they just put that in there trying to get you to read The Catcher in the Rye.
You know, what's funny is I never read it either. I was never interested. When I was a kid, growing up, I didn't like watching movies where kids were the stars. I found that to be annoying when they made little
Mhm.
kids the star of a movie because they're always so precocious and full of themselves. And ugh, I always like movies where it's adults in the lead. I wanted to be Taylor in
Mhm.
Planet of the Apes,
Right.
and so forth. I didn't want to be, the Ike Eisenman or Jodie Foster. Those were the
Mhm.
kid actors when I was so. Uh, Anyway, I forgot where I was going there.
I know we were talking about The Catcher in the Rye.
Oh, Catcher in the Rye, yeah. So my thing was, even when I was a teenager, I found most teenagers to be a-holes. I'm like, I just found them to be full of themselves, and so to me, what I'd heard about Catcher in the Rye was it was about one of these guys who was kind of counterculture minded, and
Teenage angst.
I didn't relate to that, so it didn't interest me. Now, like you said, now I'm like, because once I learned about JD Salinger totally
Mhm.
being in military intelligence
Yeah,
during
let
that
people
World War,
know what yeah, he
and
was in intelligence.
that's the only real hit book he has. I think he wrote stories, Franny and Zoe and some other stuff, but then he goes off and is a hermit practically. I find it real interesting now, so I'll probably pick it up and read it now, but maybe it was good that we
Mhm.
didn't when we were younger, Melissa, because maybe that book is a trigger for some bad things,
Yeah.
you know?
Now another character that's really a fascinating character is Halloran, the chef. And they reference his race, because this Grady guy is obviously a racist. And when you get to that bathroom scene, he
Yeah.
goes from this kind of humble butler like guy that's all Jeezy's and nice to
Yeah.
really quite wicked and mean. And you see his racism kind of come out. And he talks
Yeah.
about Halloran, but Halloran seems to he's got the Shining too, and the Shining is this psychic power where they can see things and communicate non-verbally, which is probably tied into the MK Ultra. But he seems to in the Shining the book, he doesn't die, but in this one, he's the only victim. He's the only victim in this the Shining movie.
Oh,
Nobody else is killed.
you mean Jack?
Actual. No, I mean Halloran. Halloran's the
Oh,
only
Halloran. Yeah,
victim
yeah, yeah.
in the
Yeah,
movie.
you're right. You're right. That's uh uh and what is that saying? I think it's both symbolic and not symbolic. I think that's the first. What they've done is they've accomplished pushing Jack Torrance to his first kill as a killer, as an assassin.
Right.
The
Could it be
symbolism.
like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X? Like, are they referencing what the CIA did to certain things or people who get in the
Maybe,
way?
maybe that's a good point, or even Malcolm X being killed by his own radicals,
Mhm.
which is an interesting thing. Uh, but it could also be Halloran represents the last shred of spiritual ethics, okay,
Yeah.
spiritual
A good
value,
man who does things good.
and he has to kill that. When he kills Halloran, he's killing that last spark of spiritual humanity left in him, right?
Yeah.
That's and then from there on in the film, he's just
It's
a total
done.
MK Ultra psycho. They've achieved what they've wanted. They've turned him into a killer. So that's what Halloran could represent, short of doing even more research on the name. But remember, these are names pulled from the King novel, and King
Mhm.
is, he was just a beer guzzling cocaine addict who could write brilliant horror literature. So
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
think
yeah.
there's symbolism in the names there, but we have that Charles to
Well,
Delbert thing going on.
yeah, and, Wendy, as a figure, a lot of people gave Shelley Duvall a hard time at the time she won, like, a Razzie or it was bad acting, but I think her acting was pretty damn good.
Yeah, and I think Kubrick's harassment was aimed at getting a performance out of her like that.
To
It's
be
too
that
bad
abusive
that, and I
wife,
don't know if he did this or not,
abused wife.
but it would have been nice to hear that later he would have got together with Shelley Duvall and said, you know, I'm sorry it was so rough on you, but you gave me exactly what I was hoping you would. It
He
was
was an
brilliant.
oddball, though.
He
He
was a
never
strange
liked to
guy.
work with people more than once, usually, rarely.
Yeah.
There might have been a few extra actors that did, but he was like, "Okay, we're done. Bye. Get out of here."
Well, Vitali, what's his name? Last name Vitali, who was his
Yep,
friend and assistant, appeared in Barry Lyndon,
Barry Lyndon.
Leon Vitali, Barry Lyndon,
Yep,
and Eyes Wide Shut. And I
yeah.
don't know if he was in
That's a weird story because
Full Metal
after
Jacket.
Barry Lyndon, Vitali literally surrendered his whole life to basically be his assistant and work with him. I thought that was really the most bizarre. I thought that
Right.
kind of made me uncomfortable,
Yeah, and what's
actually.
interesting is Vitali never went on to, you know, be a big director or writer
Or
or
an
anything himself.
actor.
You know,
Yeah.
it was, you're right, it was dedication to Kubrick. So, you know,
Yeah, that's
it's
creepy. That's super creepy. Sorry. It just really is. Yeah, I don't know when, and Wendy turns out to be the one who survives this whole thing. She's actually stronger than Jack, and she saves her son, and she gets out.
well, and that happens
Was
in the
that right?
book too.
Yes.
Now, in the book, of course, Jack in his last moments saves them. Um,
Mhm.
you know,
In
but
this one, he does not.
that's right, and he does not. Of course, nobody saves him.
He's actually stuck there. The way
Of
they
course,
end it, and well, I mean, there's an alternate ending that most people don't know about, but the way they end it, they zoom down the hallway after he freezes to death and they escape, and he's almost stuck in this picture, but the picture kind of, they said something about the date on the picture and connected Hitler. I don't want to ruin the documentary, so
right.
you can check it out. But there was a lot of people don't know about the alternate ending.
Hmm.
I've seen clips and pictures and images of it, but
Yeah,
the actual footage is gone. There was an alternate ending that was totally different,
yeah.
and they
It's
talk about that.
Ullman visiting her in the hospital afterwards, or
Yeah,
Danny and her in the hospital. I think it's good that they cut it and ended it with
yeah,
the enigmatic Jack in the photo thing,
yeah,
which, you know, as you say, you don't want to ruin the documentary, but I think even before we got this revelation about what it's about from Ryder, and after, closing on that shot was the best way to
yeah.
end the film, because it really,
Because
you walked out of the theater going, whoa, what's this?
what does that mean? What's going on? What just happened?
Yeah,
And the alternate ending, Allman shows up at the hospital to make sure they're okay, but there's something creepy about him. There's like this implied creepiness that, and he kind of shows some true colors. And he holds up a ball, that the one that rolled down the hallway to Danny in the hotel, he holds it up and gives it to him. Like how, you're like, where did he get that? How do you know? They ended it on that really kind of cheesy, creepy thing,
yeah,
which I'm glad they didn't do that either, because it ends it on Allman rather than Jack.
exactly, and it
Yeah.
really should have ended on Jack. And there's a film from the mid '70s titled The Changeling with George
Love
C.
it.
Scott, and he's in a
Love it.
house that's haunted by a little boy. And there's this wonderful sequence, gives me chills just to bring it up. He's late at night at his desk in the den there, and the den opens up onto the stairway that goes upstairs. And he's sitting there. It's a quiet scene. He's at his desk, and suddenly you hear this bouncing sound. It gets louder, and the camera never moves from the position, and then you see it, a little red ball bounces
Yeah.
down the stairs, rolls to the door, hits the door, comes back, and it stops right there. And George C. Scott is just looking at this quietly, right? And he walks over, and he picks it up, okay, and grabs his coat. And then the next thing, you see him out on the Brooklyn Bridge, I think it is, and he pulls the ball out of his pocket and he throws it in the river, okay. And then he goes about his business, and he's coming back to the house, and they got the camera set up in the same framing shot where the stairs are coming down and the den is there. George C. Scott comes in the door. He's taking his jacket off, and as he's hanging it up, you hear the ball bouncing down the stairs again. He turns, and it comes to a stop at his feet, and it's wet. After
And
you're like,
what's
oh,
what's even more spine-tingling and creepy about that scene is the ball was his daughter's ball, and his daughter had died in a car accident at the beginning. It
yes,
was the ball that she played with. So it has even a more
yeah,
emotional and psychological attachment for him that he's being tortured with.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
brilliant moment, a brilliant sequence in the film with all the things that it means. And
You're making me get shivers just from that scene.
it's
It's the
sometimes
best movie.
the more subtle horror. And speaking of another one, real quick, the original film of The Innocents plural, not the
Mhm.
state of being innocent, with
Yeah,
Deborah Carr. And
great movie.
this used to scare the hell out of me when I was a kid, and it still gives me creeps now. And it happens in the daylight. It's when she's out and there's the big pond that's all
Mhm,
overgrown with the English country garden kind of thing, but it's all
mhm.
overgrown. And she's looking for the little girl, and when she finds her, suddenly everything goes quiet, and she hears this creepy wailing or this weird sound, and she looks, and standing out there, like in the pond on the little island that's overgrown, not close enough to see detail, far enough away where you can't make out the detail, but it's the former school maiden or nanny that had killed herself. And there she is, her hair's all wet, her clothes are all wet, she's all pale, and she's just standing out there looking at Deborah Carr. And it's in the daytime, and it's just, oh,
You're not expecting it
yeah. And it
in the
freaks
daytime.
Deborah Carr. It's one of the greatest, ghost moments. And here's the thing about what The Shining did, what Kubrick did with The Shining. He he knew that that was in the collective, the cinema
Conscious.
fan that was going to see The Shining, that likes these kind of stories, had likely seen The Innocents, had probably seen Changeling, okay?
Mhm.
And he knew that these kind of references were there, and what they would do to the psyche and make people think. And he does a similar thing with the little girls at the end of the hall. The thing with the
Yeah.
ball rolling to Danny. He knows that people's minds are going to go to, oh, it's a ghost, like in a Casper cartoon. And maybe that's what he was also saying, that the CIA, remember, part of MK Ultra was Gottlieb, Sidney Gottlieb, and he was the occultist in MK Ultra. Okay, this
Mhm.
is a guy that was into the occult and the paranormal and things like ghosts and demons and everything. So that's why that thread, also works in The Shining, is because we know that during Vietnam they had done their research, and they had equipped the South Vietnamese guys with these backpacks with loudspeaker systems and okay, playback systems. And
Mhm.
they would go in the jungle at night, and they would turn these things on, and it was these spectral ooh wailings and creepy eerie sounds, and they would have voices speaking in Vietnamese and the local dialects there, saying all these frightening things, because they know that in the Vietnamese culture, the country people, okay, they believe that if the ghosts come back to haunt them, it freaks them out and they lose their minds. And the CIA was doing this in Vietnam, playing this in the jungles, you know, and to freak out the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese military regulars. And
Mhm.
this is the kind of stuff that Gottlieb would do. So,
Yeah.
using the idea of ghosts and the occult, and again, we go to my mentor. He's the man that taught me how to raise the dead in cemeteries to get information from them. And he had a career.
Does that actually work? Do they do that? Are they doing this kinda
Um,
thing?
I there I was in the early 90s, at nighttime in an old colonial cemetery on Long Island, the old Northport Cemetery, and I had picked my target, a woman who'd been dead for 150, 180 years, something like that. And here's the thing, I never saw a dead person
A
rise out
wispy
of the grave,
ghost.
but I have had paranormal presences, and particularly a female, around me ever since. So, did it work? I don't know. Did I invite something into my life that has followed me? wherever I've went because of that. It's possible. Um, so, and I was told that people are expecting me to know how to do that stuff. I mean, is that a mind trick? Did Gottlieb contribute that and say, hey, if we throw this supernatural stuff, paranormal
Well,
stuff, get these guys believing it, you know?
right.
And that's
I
what's going
mean,
on in The Shining, all the ghosties.
exactly. That they're essentially picking up on, like Halloran says, it's like burnt toast. It's things that have happened in the past, not just things that are. You can sense things that are. Danny sees things that are happening in the future, but he also senses things that have already been there that are not very good, and it leaves a scent of itself behind. And what's really interesting, I'll get into this, we'll tie this up in a few minutes, is I notice I will play the I had a few clips I want to play, but I'm not going to play. I'll play the trailer on our way out. But the trailer doesn't just stream in The Shining or the Clockwork Orange. It uses, for a very brief few seconds, Hotel California music, which I always found as a child that it was a very incredibly spooky song, and it is a
Oh,
spooky
yeah.
song. So it's interesting. Are they tying some kind of they're obviously tying some kind of Hollywood weird there's an implication there to use that song. Why would they use that song otherwise? The creators of the film. If
But
there's not an implication.
yeah, yeah. Um, it's interesting. My epigrams and the title of this book come from Hotel California. You know,
Okay.
yeah. We have been, the people who create this stuff, they're influenced to begin with. So therefore, what they put out influences us, and then influencers beyond that, not the social media type influencers, will then take these things that are already a crafted influence device, and then they'll put it in yet an additional context to have further impact. So what they've done is they've created an ever self-perpetuating system of influence and stuff. So we could go on forever.
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of allusion to rock stars and how they're controlled by the CIA and how they make films up in, I can't remember, Laurel Canyon or whatever. I think that's probably referenced. But I'll tell you, I heard Hotel California, I think it was released the year after I was born or the year, but when I was little, my uncles would listen to it. And it always creeped me out. I'm like, this song is spooky. This is a scary song. And I never liked it. It's a good song now. I like it. But when I was little, I didn't like them playing it because whatever it was about the sound, I was like, turn this off. This is a scary song.
Yeah, it is.
It is. So, well, so that kind of ties it up about it. Is there any last things you want to say about The Shining or MK Ultra or any of those other films of Kubrick and how he's connected to it?
Just rewatch 2001: A Space Odyssey. Watch The Shining. Watch The Shining. Watch A Clockwork Shining, the documentary. Then go back and watch The Shining, and then go back and watch Kubrick's. The big ones: 2001, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut, to see with new eyes if there's anything you can pick out further. Right. And I do have. Before I forget, Malia posted a link to a promo for Napoleon II. I don't know if you can play that.
Sure.
For your audience.
Where's the link? I don't.
I think it was in the chat. Let me see.
Oh, I'm not getting any commentary at all. I'm not getting. Is it on your chat? I'm not getting any of that commentary. There's stuff that's not making it to my system, and that happens
it's at the
a lot.
Walter Bosley channel at YouTube. If people, that's another thing. Go to the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube in shorts, and there's videos, and then there's shorts. They can go check out the stuff there, and check out the channel. And of course, walterbosley.com/shop.
Yes, go to
Oh,
walterbosley.com/shop. I put the link to your YouTube channel
thank you.
in the comments. Oh, okay. So she's saying, here, let's do a little share here. I'm going to, she says it is the latest in Walter's shorts. I'm going to
Yeah.
show,
Yeah, it's the newest one.
we'll show this one. And let's add the source. There we go. And this one can take the big screen. There we are. And here we are.
In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte entered the Great Pyramid of Giza alone. The next morning, he emerged pale, shaken, and refused to speak about what he had experienced. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign was about more than conquest. Some believe he was searching for something far older esoteric knowledge hidden beneath the sands. Napoleon's fascination with ancient symbols and secret societies has fueled speculation for centuries. Was he influenced by Freemasonry? Did he seek the wisdom of the ancients to reshape the world? During that night inside the Great Pyramid, legend says Napoleon had a vision that showed him his fate. But what did he see? Power or something darker? Whatever he experienced inside the Great Pyramid, Napoleon carried it with him until his final days. Was Napoleon's rise to power fueled by ancient secrets? Or did the pyramid reveal a truth too great to bear? The answers lie in the esoteric Napoleon. Discover the secrets they didn't teach in school.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, that's great. That's great. All right. Well, Walter, I want to thank you for coming on. And of course, I'll always invite you again because you always have interesting things to talk about.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed
and
talking.
It's
this is fun.
Fascinating. I'm going to pop you off there and don't feel like you have to wait around or anything. I'm going to pop you off. And I am going to play for people the trailer for A Clockwork Shining. Go check it out. Go to Walter's site, walterbosley.com/shop, and get the Esoteric Napoleon 2. And thank you so much for coming on, Walter.
Thank you, Melissa.
All right, guys. Here is that. I'm just going to say a quick goodbye. Join me Thursday. I have author and musician Matthew Lee Embleton on. He's going to be talking about the symbolism of like the ancient Vikings, ancient symbolism, runes and stuff, and tarot, and how that was hijacked by modern governments like the Nazi Party and how it was used for propaganda. We're going to be going there. So join me Thursday, 8:00 p.m. Eastern. I will be here. We're taking a Christmas break. My son is coming to visit us, so I won't be around, probably not until New Year's Eve. So that's how it's going to go. And I'm going to leave you with this. It's quite a long trailer, but it gives you a sense of this documentary, and I want you guys to check that out. Let me make sure I have the right one. Here we go. We'll see you on Thursday.
Hallucinogenic drugs, hypnosis, electric shocks to the brain.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
Some of the methods used in secret CIA mind control experiments.
There are many theories as to what The Shining is really about, from the faking of the moon landing to Native American genocide and the Holocaust.
Now, if he did fake the Apollo moon landing, then he probably has really deep connections into the intelligence world. Why are there these gigantic continuity errors in this movie?
The occulted meaning has to be comprehensible. It's just hidden, usually in a very systematic way, so that it could be understood by someone coming along later on who knows what the real meaning is supposed to be.
We believe that there's something even more sinister lurking beneath the surface of this masterful film.
So Lookout Mountain Hotel looked a lot like the Overlook Hotel.
You realize that there's no such thing as coincidences like that.
As Lookout Mountain Studios, ran by the Air Force.
That told the story of nuclear weapons testing by the United States.
Of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, the Air Force was known to be the most excited, the most turned on by MK Ultra and its prospects.
Reportedly, there were more films made at Lookout Mountain than at all the other film studios in Hollywood.
We really don't know what these famous film directors were being recruited for, what project or whatever. Was it the moon landing?
The CIA's MKUltra programs were admitted to the public in 1975, 5 years before the release of The Shining.
These experiments were done without the informed consent of the patients.
Look at some UFO cases, and the things that are reported tells me that MKUltra is likely being applied.
In my MKUltra mind control experience, I was taken to various military, NASA, and DARPA installations for sophisticated mind control programming.
Walt Disney, Marilyn Monroe, James Stewart, Cary Grant, Ronald Reagan. Nobody really knows what they were doing up there.
As well as high-ranking military and Department of Defense personnel.
What people don't realize is that many of the people that worked with Kubrick also worked with Kennedy. This is actually the smoking gun proving that Kubrick was working with the government.
These were all CIA-sponsored experiments.
I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
And putting little symbolic, cryptic clues and Easter eggs pertaining to the fact that they're still doing it.
These clues include a hidden swastika in the background of the gold room.
What was the setup, what it was being told, and realize that it was a lie all along.
But right there in the narrative, in the dialogue, they're telling you that this was a very real program coming out of those nice folks at the CIA.